My name is Heather Wilson, and I'm 32 years old. 2 weeks after burying my parents, I sat in a leather chair across from our family lawyer, my brother Nathan beside me. The grief still felt raw, but I thought at least we were in this together. We'd always been different, but surely shared loss would bridge our gaps. Mr. Peterson adjusted his glasses and opened the thick folder containing my parents' will. My stomach tightened as he cleared his throat. I expected we'd split my parents' modest estate equally. I was wrong. Before I tell you how my world collapsed that day, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about family betrayal and how I fought back. I grew up in Maplewood, a middle-class suburb of Cincinnati, where my parents built their lives from scratch. My father Richard worked as a financial advisor at the same firm for 35 years, while my mother Elizabeth taught third grade at the local elementary school. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, prudent with money, and proud of the life they'd created. Our family home was a 4-bedroom colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch where Mom would read during summer evenings. Dad built the treehouse in the backyard himself, and Mom planted a garden that bloomed spectacularly every spring. It wasn't fancy, but it was filled with warmth and stability. That house represented everything my parents valued: consistency, tradition, and family roots. Nathan and I were as different as siblings could be. 3 years older than me, he was always the practical one, excelling in math and business classes, joining the debate team, and planning his future with spreadsheets by age 16. I was the creative spirit, constantly covered in paint or clay, writing poetry that my English teachers praised while my parents smiled politely. Where Nathan was calculated and strategic, I was intuitive and spontaneous. Heather lives with her head in the clouds, my dad would say, not unkindly but with a hint of concern. Nathan knows how to keep his feet on the ground. These comments seemed innocent enough at the time, but looking back, they revealed so much about their perceptions of us. The differences in how they treated us were subtle. When Nathan brought home straight A's, there'd be a special dinner celebration. When I won the state art competition, there were congratulations but also questions about real career prospects. When Nathan joined the business program at Ohio State, my parents beamed with pride. When I chose to study fine arts at a small liberal arts college, there were tense conversations about student loans and job security. "We just want what's best for you, honey," Mom would say, while Dad added, "Art is a wonderful hobby, but you need something to fall back on." I convinced myself they were just being practical parents. Yes, they connected more easily with Nathan's worldview, but that didn't mean they loved me any less. They just didn't understand my passions the way they understood his. After college, Nathan followed directly in Dad's footsteps, joining the same financial firm. Within 5 years, he had a corner office, a luxury condo, and was dating a doctor's daughter from my parents' country club. Meanwhile, I moved to Chicago, worked 3 part-time jobs while building my portfolio, and lived in a tiny apartment with 2 roommates. I sold paintings occasionally and picked up graphic design gigs to pay the bills. My relationship with my parents grew strained during this time. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Visits home were punctuated by uncomfortable questions about my real job prospects and subtle comparisons to Nathan's accomplishments. "Did you hear Nathan just made senior advisor?" Dad would mention over dinner. "His firm manages portfolios for some of the biggest names in the state now," Mom would add. I'd nod and change the subject, the familiar sting of being the family disappointment washing over me. About 2 years ago, I started gaining traction in my career. I landed a position as creative director for a boutique marketing agency and sold several pieces to a respected gallery. With my first steady paycheck, I flew home for Thanksgiving, excited to show my parents I could succeed on my own terms. That weekend felt different. For the first time, they asked questions about my work that went beyond just polite interest. Dad even mentioned one of my paintings he'd seen on my Instagram. "The blue one with the buildings reflected in water, there's something special about that one," he said, surprising me completely. Mom pulled me aside before I left and squeezed my hand. "We're proud of you, honey. You stuck with it, even when it wasn't easy." That visit gave me hope that we were turning a corner in our relationship. I started calling more often, sending them pictures of my work, inviting them to visit me in Chicago. They never made the trip. Dad always had work commitments, Mom worried about leaving their elderly dog, but our conversations grew warmer. Then came the accident. A rainy night, a truck driver who fell asleep at the wheel, and both my parents were gone. The highway patrol officer said it was instantaneous. They didn't suffer. As if that made it better somehow. Nathan handled the funeral arrangements. He was always good in a crisis, methodical and composed. I fell apart, sobbing through the service while he stoically greeted mourners and thanked them for coming. Later, people commented on how admirably he'd managed everything, while giving me sympathetic glances and awkward pats on the shoulder. The day before the lawyer's appointment, Nathan and I had dinner at my parents' house, their house, surrounded by their belongings, their photographs, their lives frozen in time. We reminisced about childhood memories, and for a moment, it felt like we were just a brother and sister sharing our grief. They were so excited about your art show next month, Nathan mentioned casually. I looked up, surprised. They told you about that? Of course, he said. Mom kept that gallery announcement on the fridge. Dad was researching train tickets to Chicago. My throat tightened. They were planning to come. After all these years, they were finally going to see my work in person. And now they never would. That night, Nathan and I cleared the dinner dishes together, and I thought perhaps our shared loss might bridge the gap between us. We were different, yes, but we were the only family each of us had left. How quickly that illusion shattered the next day. The morning of the will reading, I dressed carefully in a black pencil skirt and emerald green blouse my mother had complimented the last time I wore it. I twisted my auburn hair into a simple knot and applied minimal makeup, still feeling the heaviness of grief in every movement. The jewelry box on my dresser held the pearl earrings Mom had given me for my college graduation. Every woman should have a classic pair, she'd said. I fastened them on, needing to carry a piece of her with me. The lawyer's office occupied the third floor of a brick building downtown, with the firm name Peterson, Goldman and Associates etched on frosted glass doors. The reception area smelled of leather-bound books and expensive cologne. A receptionist with perfectly coiffed gray hair offered condolences and coffee in the same practiced breath. Nathan arrived 5 minutes after me, immaculate in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. He'd always been handsome in that conventional, trustworthy way, strong jaw, neatly trimmed dark hair, confident posture. Today, his eyes were shadowed with fatigue, the only indication he was suffering too. "Morning, Heather," he said, brushing a perfunctory kiss against my cheek. "Did you sleep okay at the house?" "Not really," I admitted. "It's strange being there without them." He nodded, checking his watch. "Shall we get this over with?" The receptionist led us down a hallway lined with landscape paintings that made me think of the kind sold in hotel gift shops. Mr. Peterson was waiting in a conference room, standing as we entered. He'd been my parents' lawyer for 20 years, a golf buddy of my father's, and a fixture at my parents' annual Christmas parties. "Heather, Nathan. Thank you for coming." He gestured toward the chairs. "Again, my deepest condolences. Your parents were wonderful people." The conference table gleamed with polish, a box of tissues strategically placed in the center. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. This was where people fell apart, where lives changed with the reading of a document. Peterson's sympathetic grimace only heightened my anxiety. "Before we begin," Peterson said, settling his reading glasses on his nose, "I want you both to know that everything here is standard legal procedure. I'm just the messenger." My mind flashed back to the funeral 3 days earlier. The church had been full, a testament to how well-respected my parents were in the community. Nathan had delivered a flawless eulogy, his voice breaking at just the right moments. I'd been asked to speak too, but couldn't form coherent sentences through my tears, so instead I'd read a poem that reminded me of them. Afterward, mourners had approached Nathan with firm handshakes and stories about our father's integrity. They'd hugged me gently and murmured how difficult this must be, as if I were a child rather than a 32-year-old woman. The wake at my parents' house afterward had been surreal. Women from my mother's garden club arranged casseroles in the kitchen while Nathan's colleagues from the firm clustered in the living room, speaking in hushed tones about market fluctuations and client portfolios. I'd wandered through the rooms like a ghost, touching my mother's collection of antique teacups, straightening my father's books on the shelves. Now, sitting in this sterile conference room, I felt that same disconnection, as if I were watching the scene from outside my body. Peterson opened a thick manila folder and cleared his throat. "This is the last will and testament of Richard and Elizabeth Wilson, revised and signed 14 months ago," he began, his voice shifting into formal legal cadence. The next few minutes passed in a blur as Peterson read through standard legal language. I caught phrases like "being of sound mind" and "hereby declare," but didn't fully tune in until he reached the distribution of assets. "To our son, Nathan Richard Wilson, we bequeath our primary residence at 1487 Maple Avenue, including all furnishings and contents therein." I blinked, glancing at Nathan, whose expression remained neutral. "Additionally, to Nathan we leave our entire investment portfolio, all bank accounts and financial holdings, the vacation property in Michigan, and all vehicles currently in our possession." My heart began to pound as Peterson continued, detailing how Nathan would receive my father's vintage watch collection, my mother's jewelry, except for a few specific pieces, and their retirement accounts. "To our daughter, Heather Elizabeth Wilson," Peterson finally said, and I leaned forward, waiting for my portion. "We leave the following personal items: Elizabeth's collection of art books, her pearl earrings already in Heather's possession, Richard's set of paintbrushes purchased for Heather's 16th birthday, and the family photograph albums." I waited for him to continue, but he simply turned the page and moved on to administrative details about executor responsibilities, Nathan, of course, and tax considerations. "I'm sorry," I interrupted, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "That's it?" Peterson looked up, his expression carefully composed. "Yes, that concludes the distribution of assets." "There must be some mistake," I said, my hands gripping the armrests of my chair. "They left me nothing but books and paintbrushes? What about the trust fund they always mentioned? Or Mom's studio space that she said would be perfect for me someday?" Peterson glanced uncomfortably at Nathan before responding. "There was no trust established for you, Heather. The studio was part of the main property, which goes to Nathan." I turned to my brother, whose face remained impassive except for a slight tightening around his mouth. "Did you know about this?" "I knew they'd updated their will last year," he said carefully. "They didn't share the specifics." A wave of nausea swept over me. "So our childhood home, the lake house we spent every summer at, their savings, everything goes to you? And I get some books and paintbrushes I gave Dad years ago?" Peterson interjected, "Heather, I understand this is upsetting." "Upsetting? It's incomprehensible." My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "We're both their children. How could they do this?" "Your parents had the legal right to distribute their assets as they saw fit," Peterson replied, his tone suggesting he'd had this conversation before. "The will is properly executed and witnessed. There's no legal ambiguity here." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the paintings on the wall blurring at the edges of my vision. "Was there a letter?" I asked, grasping for any explanation. "Did they leave any message explaining why?" Peterson hesitated, then reached back into the folder. "There is a sealed envelope addressed to you." He handed me a cream-colored envelope with my name written in my mother's elegant handwriting. My fingers trembled as I took it, suddenly unsure if I wanted to read its contents in this room, under their watchful eyes. "I think we're finished here," Nathan said, standing and buttoning his suit jacket. "Unless there's anything else, Mr. Peterson?" "Just some paperwork for you as executor," Peterson replied. "Heather, do you have any other questions I can answer?" 100 questions raced through my mind, but they weren't legal ones. Why did my parents think I deserved nothing? What had I done that was so unforgivable? Had they ever really loved me at all? No, I managed to say, clutching the envelope. No questions. As Peterson let us out, reality began to sink in. I wasn't just grieving my parents now. I was grieving the relationship I thought we had, the reconciliation I believed was happening, and the security I'd assumed would help me build my future. The elevator doors closed behind us, sealing Nathan and me in uncomfortable silence. I stared at our distorted reflections in the polished metal, barely recognizing myself in the pale, shocked face looking back at me. The letter from my parents burned in my hand like a hot coal. "I can give you a ride back to the house," Nathan offered as we reached the lobby, his tone maddeningly casual. "We should talk." "The house," I repeated. "You mean your house now?" He sighed, guiding me toward the exit with a light touch on my elbow that I immediately shrugged off. "Let's not do this in public," he murmured, nodding politely to the security guard as we passed. The April air felt too bright, too normal for the earthquake that had just demolished my world. Nathan led the way to his gleaming black BMW in the parking lot. Once inside, he didn't start the engine immediately, instead turning to face me. "I know this is a shock," he began, his voice taking on the same soothing tone he probably used with anxious investors. "But try to understand their perspective." "Their perspective?" I cut him off. "Please, enlighten me about their perspective, Nathan, because I clearly didn't understand anything about our parents." He smoothed his tie, a gesture so reminiscent of our father that it made my chest ache. "They built everything they had through careful planning and traditional values. They wanted their legacy protected and managed responsibly. And I'm irresponsible?" The words tasted bitter on my tongue. "Let's be honest, Heather. You've spent your adult life making choices they didn't understand. Art school, moving to Chicago, those years bouncing between temporary jobs, that phase with the musician boyfriend with the tattoos. That phase lasted 6 months when I was 24. I exploded. And what does any of that have to do with completely disinheriting me?" Nathan's expression hardened slightly. "They worked their entire lives to build what they had. Dad spent 35 years at the firm. Mom sacrificed her own ambitions to raise us in a stable home. They wanted someone who shared their values to steward what they built. And that wasn't me." My voice sounded hollow even to myself. "You chose a different path," he said, as if that explained everything. "They respected your choice to pursue art, but that didn't obligate them to fund it." Something in his phrasing caught my attention. "Did you tell them that? That supporting me would be funding my lifestyle?" A flicker of something, discomfort, guilt, I couldn't tell, crossed his face before disappearing. "We discussed family responsibility, yes." "We? You mean you and our parents had discussions about their will? About me?" Nathan started the car, clearly wanting to end this line of questioning. "They asked for my input as someone who understands finance and estate planning. I gave it." My blood ran cold as the implications sank in. "You helped them cut me out." "I helped them make decisions that aligned with their values," he corrected, pulling out of the parking space. "And if you're honest with yourself, Heather, you know your lifestyle choices disappointed them." The casual cruelty of his assessment felt like a slap. "They were coming to my gallery show," I said quietly. "You told me yourself." "Mom kept the announcement on the refrigerator." Nathan shrugged slightly. "They were trying to be supportive in the ways they could. That doesn't change the bigger picture." As we drove through familiar streets toward our childhood home, anger began replacing my initial shock. Nathan had played the dutiful son while systematically ensuring he would receive everything. He'd positioned himself as the responsible steward while painting me as the family disappointment. "Stop the car," I said suddenly. "What?" "We're almost." "Stop the car, Nathan. Now." He pulled over with an exasperated sigh. "You're being dramatic." "Am I?" I turned to face him fully. "Did you manipulate our parents into cutting me out of their will?" "Of course not," he scoffed. "They made their own decisions." "With your input as someone who understands estate planning," I quoted back to him. I advised them based on what was best for the family assets, he said defensively. The family assets, I repeated. Not your assets. Our families. Which includes me. Nathan's expression hardened. Look, Heather, I know this hurts your feelings. My feelings? I nearly shouted. This isn't about hurt feelings. This is about you convincing our parents to disinherit me completely. They knew you'd just waste it, he snapped, his composed facade finally cracking. What would you do with that money, Heather? Blow it on art supplies and gallery rentals for paintings that barely sell? Invest in another failed relationship? They worked too hard to see their life's work squandered. The venom in his voice stunned me into momentary silence. This wasn't just about money or property. This was how my brother, my only remaining family, truly saw me. I'm their daughter, I said finally, my voice breaking. I deserved better than books and paintbrushes. You deserved what you earned, he countered coldly. I stayed. I built my career according to their values. I gave them grandchildren. I visited every weekend. Where were you for the past 10 years? Sending occasional texts and flying home once a year acting like the misunderstood artist? Each accusation landed like a physical blow. The worst part was the kernel of truth buried within his cruelty. I hadn't been as present as I could have been. I had kept my distance when family gatherings became uncomfortable. I had chosen my own path instead of the one they'd wanted for me. That doesn't make me less their child, I whispered. No, but it made you less a part of their daily lives. His voice softened slightly, taking on an almost pitying tone that was somehow worse than his anger. Look, I'm not completely heartless. I know this is difficult. If you need some financial help getting back on your feet. Stop, I held up my hand, rage burning through my grief. Don't you dare offer me charity from what should have been partly mine. It was never yours, Heather. That's what you don't understand. He sighed heavily. The will is legal and binding. You can be angry about it, or you can accept it and move forward. I reached for the door handle, needing to escape the suffocating interior of his luxury car. I'll get my things from the house today. Please be gone when I arrive. Where will you go? He called as I stepped out onto the sidewalk. Why would you care? I slammed the door without waiting for his response. I stood on the sidewalk, watching his car disappear around the corner, clutching my mother's unopened letter. When he was gone, my knees finally gave out, and I sank onto a nearby bench. A middle-aged woman walking her dog gave me a concerned glance, but I turned away, unable to explain to a stranger that I had just lost my parents twice, once to death, and now to the devastating knowledge that in the end, they hadn't valued me equally to my brother. With shaking hands, I called a rideshare to take me back to my parents' house, Nathan's house, where I would pack up the meager inheritance I'd been left, some books, photo albums, and the ghosts of a family I'd never truly understood. The small extended-stay hotel room became my home for the next week. Its beige walls and generic landscape paintings were a fitting backdrop to the colorless fog my life had become. I'd packed my inheritance, 3 boxes of art books, photo albums, and the paintbrushes, along with my clothes and the few personal items I'd brought for what I'd expected would be a short visit to finalize my parents' affairs. On my 3rd night there, I finally found the courage to open my mother's letter. Her familiar handwriting swam before my tear-filled eyes. My dearest Heather **. If you're reading this, your father and I are gone, and you've learned about our decisions regarding our estate. I know this must hurt you deeply, and for that pain, I am truly sorry *. Please understand that this decision wasn't made lightly or without years of consideration. Your father and I built our lives on certain principles: financial responsibility, traditional family values, and security for future generations. Nathan has embraced these values in ways you chose not to *. This isn't about loving you less, we have always loved both our children equally. But love and inheritance are different matters. Nathan has proven himself a careful steward who will preserve what we've built and pass it on to his children. Your path, while creative and brave, has never aligned with these priorities *. We admire your independence and artistic spirit, traits I sometimes wish I'd had more of myself. But these qualities also led you to reject the life plans we hoped for you, and we respected your right to make those choices. Those same choices have consequences. The items we've left you hold special meaning, my art books that inspired your creativity, the family photos that preserve our happiest memories, and the brushes your father bought when he finally recognized your talent was more than a hobby. I hope someday you'll understand this wasn't rejection but acceptance, that you chose a different way than ours. We're proud of your resilience and talent, even when we struggled to show it properly. With eternal love. Mom. I read the letter 3 times, then crumpled it in my fist before smoothing it out again. Her words were both tender and cruel, acknowledging my talent and spirit while essentially saying I deserved nothing because I hadn't lived by their principles. The contradiction between loving both children equally and their profoundly unequal treatment was staggering. The days blurred together after that. I extended my hotel stay, unable to face returning to Chicago and the life waiting for me there. I called in sick to work, using my parents' death as an excuse without explaining the rest. My boss was understanding at first, but after 2 weeks, the sympathy began wearing thin. "We need you back, Heather," she said during our last call. "The Peterson campaign is in full swing, and your designs are central to it." "I know," I replied, staring at the hotel ceiling. "I just need a little more time. We've been patient, but we have deadlines. If you can't come back by Monday, we'll need to reassign the project." I should have cared more. This was my career, the independence I'd fought for. But all I could feel was a dull resignation. Do what you need to do. By the end of the 3rd week, I'd lost my position at the agency. My roommate in Chicago packed up my portion of the apartment and shipped my essential belongings to the hotel, needing to find a replacement to cover my share of the rent. My carefully constructed life was unraveling thread by thread. Nathan called twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. "The estate is going through probate," his first message informed me in his businesslike tone. "I'll need you to sign some paperwork. Call me back." The second, a week later, sounded more irritated. "Heather, this is childish. You need to sign these documents. And frankly, you should be making plans. I heard you lost your job. How long are you going to hide in that hotel?" I deleted both messages without responding. My savings dwindled as the hotel charges accumulated. I made half-hearted attempts to look for graphic design freelance work, but my portfolio remained unopened, my emails to contacts unsent. The gallery in Chicago that had been so excited about my upcoming show left increasingly concerned messages about whether I still planned to exhibit. Eventually, those calls stopped too. Most days, I barely left the room except to buy convenience store sandwiches or cheap wine. I stopped painting entirely. What was the point? The people whose approval I'd secretly craved my entire life had delivered their final judgment on my worth from beyond the grave. Some mornings, I paged through the family photo albums, studying pictures of the 4 of us, vacation snapshots, holiday gatherings, school events. We looked happy, normal. Had it all been an illusion? In one Christmas photo when I was about 12, my father had his arm around Nathan's shoulders, both beaming proudly, while Mom and I stood slightly apart. I hadn't noticed that separation before, but now it seemed glaringly obvious. As April turned to May, my funds grew critically low. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I worried about making my next hotel payment, Nathan was probably redecorating the family home or deciding which of my parents' possessions to keep or discard. My phone rang one afternoon, a Chicago number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but some small part of me still functioning on autopilot hit the accept button. "Heather? It's Emma Reeves." The name took a moment to register. Emma, my former art professor from college who had become a mentor and friend over the years. I hadn't spoken to her in months. "Oh. Hi." My voice sounded rusty from disuse. "Sweetie, what's going on?" "Margot from the Lakeside Gallery called me." She said you're not responding to her about your show, and your phone goes straight to voicemail. I glanced at my phone, realizing the battery had been dying regularly because I often forgot to charge it. I'm dealing with some family stuff, I managed. Your parents, I know. I'm so sorry for your loss. Her voice softened. But Margot mentioned something about you being stuck in Ohio still? It's been nearly a month, hasn't it? Yeah. I didn't elaborate. Emma was silent for a moment, then asked directly, what else happened, Heather? Perhaps it was her familiar voice, or simply that someone had finally asked the right question, but the dam broke. Words poured out of me, the will, Nathan's betrayal, my mother's letter, my collapsing career. Emma listened without interrupting. When I finally ran out of steam, she said simply, I'm coming to get you. What? No, Emma, you're in Chicago, and you have classes. It's the end of the semester, and I'm owed some personal days. Text me the hotel address. I'll be there tomorrow. You can't just. I can and I will, she cut me off firmly. Pack your things. You're not staying in that hotel another night. I started to argue, then felt the fight drain out of me. Okay. After we hung up, I looked around the dismal hotel room, at the untouched art supplies in the corner, at the half-empty wine bottle on the nightstand. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. Maybe not hope exactly, but at least the recognition that I didn't have to face this alone. True to her word, Emma arrived the next day, knocking briskly on my hotel room door at precisely noon. When I opened it, her sharp intake of breath told me exactly how I looked, unwashed hair pulled into a messy ponytail, dark circles under my eyes, wearing the same sweatpants and t-shirt I'd worn for days. Oh, honey, she said, but there was no pity in her tone, only determination. She marched into the room and threw open the curtains, letting in a flood of spring sunlight that made me wince. First things first. Shower, clean clothes, and then we're getting out of this depressing box. There was no arguing with Emma when she used that tone, the same one she'd employed in critique sessions when I was her student and tried to make excuses for unfinished work. 40 minutes later, freshly showered and dressed in the last clean outfit I had, I sat across from her at a nearby diner. Eat, she instructed, pushing a plate of pancakes toward me. Your brain can't function properly without fuel. I managed a few bites, my appetite awakening reluctantly after weeks of barely eating. Now, she said once I'd made decent progress on the food, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. I nodded, bracing myself for a lecture about responsibility or moving forward. What your parents did was wrong. The simple declaration hung in the air between us. It wasn't at all what I'd expected to hear. It was cruel, unfair, and profoundly hurtful, she continued, her gray eyes holding mine steadily. And you have every right to be devastated. Tears welled up instantly. After weeks of questioning whether I deserved what happened, hearing someone validate my pain was overwhelming. But, she continued, what you're doing now is giving them the power to destroy your future as well as alter your past. I don't know what else to do, I admitted. Everything feels pointless. Emma leaned forward, her voice lowering. Let me tell you a story I've never shared with my students. When I was 32, exactly your age, my family disowned me. What? I stared at her in shock. Emma, with her impeccable credentials and prestigious career, never seemed like someone who'd faced such rejection. My parents were deeply religious, conservative people from rural Minnesota. When I came out as gay and moved in with my partner, they cut me off completely. Not just emotionally, they rewrote their will, just like your parents did, leaving everything to my younger sister who had married a man from their church. I'd known Emma for years but had never heard this part of her history. What did you do? First? I fell apart, much like you're doing now. She smiled wryly. 3 months of cheap wine and self-pity. I nearly lost my first teaching position. Then one day, my partner, now my wife of 28 years, said something that changed everything. Their rejection isn't proof of your unworthiness. It's evidence of their failure. The words resonated somewhere deep inside me. Your parents' failure wasn't loving you, Emma continued. It was their inability to see and value you for who you actually are, rather than who they wanted you to be. That's not your failure, Heather. That's theirs. For the first time in weeks, something shifted in my perspective. I'd been carrying the weight of their disappointment my entire life, trying to prove my worth while simultaneously fighting for my independence. What if the problem had never been me at all? What did you do after that realization? I asked. I fought back, Emma said simply. Not with anger, though there was plenty of that, but with determination to reclaim my narrative. Legally, financially, and emotionally. Legally? My parents' will wasn't as airtight as they thought. Neither was their process. My sister had been heavily involved in helping them update their estate plans, which opened the door to questions about undue influence. My mind immediately went to Nathan's admission about advising our parents. Emma continued, I'm not saying your situation is identical, but have you considered that there might be more to this story than what appears on the surface? Nathan did mention he'd advised them on estate planning, I said slowly. And the will was changed just 14 months ago, when he was already working at Dad's firm. Interesting timing, Emma observed. When did your parents start warming up to you again? About 2 years ago. After I got the creative director position. So they revised their will after beginning to reconcile with you? Emma raised an eyebrow. That doesn't add up, does it? It didn't. If anything, their newfound interest and pride in my career should have coincided with more equal treatment in their will, not complete disinheritance. What should I do? I asked, feeling a spark of something I hadn't felt in weeks, purpose. First, we're checking out of that hotel. You're staying with me in Chicago until you get back on your feet. Second, you need a lawyer, not your parents' lawyer, and definitely not a lawyer from your dad's firm. Someone completely independent. I can't afford. You'll pay me back when you're working again, she said dismissively. And third, we're going to revisit that family home before we leave town. Not to speak to Nathan, but to gather evidence. Evidence? If your parents really had the change of heart you described, there should be signs of it in their home. Did they keep your artwork? Did they save articles about your career? Did they have plans to attend your gallery show, as Nathan mentioned? These things matter. For the first time since the will reading, I felt a flicker of hope. Not that I'd suddenly inherit what my parents had denied me, but that I might at least understand the truth. What if we don't find anything? I asked. Emma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Then at least you'll know. But either way, Heather, your worth isn't determined by what they left you in a will. Remember that. The next morning, we drove to my childhood home, timing our visit for when Nathan would be at work. Using the spare key I still had, we entered quietly, feeling like intruders despite my lifetime of belonging in these rooms. Where would they keep important documents or personal items? Emma asked. Dad's study, probably. And Mom had a cedar chest in their bedroom where she kept mementos. We started with the study, which looked untouched since my father's death. His leather chair still held the impression of his body, and his reading glasses lay folded on the desk. I felt a pang of grief, pushing it aside to focus on our mission. The filing cabinet yielded nothing unusual: tax records, house documents, insurance papers. But as I turned to leave, I noticed a framed article hanging beside his diplomas that I hadn't seen before. It was from a Chicago business magazine, featuring innovative marketing campaigns. My campaign for a sustainable clothing brand was highlighted, with my name credited as creative director. He framed your work, Emma said softly. In my mother's cedar chest, we found more treasures: a portfolio containing every card and letter I'd ever sent them, newspaper clippings about art shows I'd participated in, even a printed copy of the email confirming their train tickets to Chicago for my gallery opening, dated just 2 weeks before their accident. Most revealing was a notebook in my mother's handwriting, apparently a journal she'd kept sporadically. The most recent entry, dated just a month before their deaths, read: Spoke with Heather today about her new collection. She sounds more confident than I've ever heard her. Richard says we should consider revising our arrangements again after we visit her show. Nathan won't be happy, but it's time to acknowledge that Heather has proven herself on her own terms, not ours. Maybe we've been wrong all these years. I stared at the words, my vision blurring with tears. They were going to change it. They just didn't have time. Emma squeezed my shoulder. This is important, Heather. Not just emotionally, but legally. Keep looking. In my father's desk drawer, I found a folder labeled Estate Planning, Updates. Inside was correspondence with another law firm, not Peterson's, inquiring about revising their will after their Chicago trip. The contradiction between their apparent intentions and the will that Nathan had helped shape was stark and troubling. As we carefully documented everything with photos, a new sense of purpose replaced my despair. My parents' final message to me hadn't been the rejection in their outdated will or even my mother's carefully worded letter explaining it. Their true feelings were here in these treasured mementos and unfinished plans. I'm calling a lawyer as soon as we get back to Chicago, I said with newfound resolve. Not to get rich or take everything from Nathan, that's not what this is about. But he manipulated them, Emma. He stopped them from making things right. One step at a time, Emma cautioned. But yes, I think there's definitely something worth investigating here. As we left the house, carefully locking up behind us, I glanced back at the blue shutters and wraparound porch. For the first time since the accident, I remembered my parents with love rather than hurt. Whatever happened next, I knew they had been on a journey toward acceptance, a journey tragically cut short. In the car, Emma handed me her phone. Call Margot about your show. Tell her you're back. I hesitated only briefly before dialing. Art had always been my voice, my truth. It was time to speak again. The day after returning to Chicago with Emma, I sat in the office of Julia Hernandez, a sharp-eyed attorney specializing in estate litigation. Her office was warm but professional, with credentials from Northwestern Law displayed alongside abstract paintings that immediately put me at ease. So, she said after I'd explained my situation, you believe your brother exerted undue influence over your parents to secure a more favorable distribution of assets for himself. Yes, I replied, showing her the photos we'd taken of the journal entries and correspondence with the other law firm. They were planning to revise their will after visiting my art show, but the accident happened before they could. Julia studied the evidence thoughtfully. This is compelling, but challenging. Undue influence cases require substantial evidence that the influencer, your brother in this case, overcame the will of the testators. The journal entry and inquiries to another law firm certainly suggest your parents were reconsidering, but we'd need more to prove Nathan actively manipulated them. What kind of evidence would help? Emma asked from the chair beside me. Communications between Nathan and your parents about the will. Testimony from others who might have known about pressure he applied. Evidence that he isolated them from you or misrepresented your situation to them. She tapped her pen against her legal pad. We'd also want to look into the circumstances around the will signing. Was Nathan present? Did he arrange the meeting with the attorney? These details matter. I thought about the family friends, my parents' colleagues, the neighbors who might have insights. I can make a list of people to contact. Good, Julia nodded. We should also request all documentation related to the will from Peterson's firm. They're required to maintain records of the entire process. What about Nathan's financial situation? I asked, remembering his aggressive defense of the inheritance. Could that be relevant? Julia's eyes sharpened. Absolutely. If he was experiencing financial difficulties around the time he advised your parents on their estate planning, that strengthens our case. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of investigative work. Julia filed the initial challenge to the will and sent formal requests for documentation to Peterson's firm. Meanwhile, I began the uncomfortable task of contacting family friends and my parents' associates. My first call was to Margaret Whitaker, my mother's closest friend from the garden club and someone who had known our family for decades. Heather, darling, she answered warmly. How are you holding up? The genuine concern in her voice made my throat tighten. I'm managing, Margaret. Actually, I'm calling because I need to understand something about Mom and Dad's last year. Of course, anything. Did they ever mention changing their will or their feelings about my career? A lengthy pause followed. I shouldn't be gossiping about this, she finally said, her voice lowered. But your mother was very excited about your gallery show. She called me the day they bought the train tickets to Chicago. Did she mention anything about their will? Another pause. Elizabeth mentioned that she and Richard had been reconsidering some decisions they'd made. She felt they had been unfair to you. My heart raced. Did Nathan know about this? I believe so. He stopped by during our coffee date once, rather unexpected, and Elizabeth became quite guarded after he arrived. Changed the subject completely. This pattern repeated with several other contacts. My father's fishing buddy mentioned Dad talking proudly about my latest marketing campaign. My mother's sister recalled a phone call where my mother expressed regret about listening too much to Nathan's concerns regarding family finances. Most revealing was my conversation with Mr. Peterson's legal assistant, who initially refused to speak with me until Julia explained the potential ethical implications of withholding information about possible undue influence. I shouldn't tell you this, she said nervously over the phone, but your brother scheduled the will revision meeting, not your parents. He came in alone first to discuss the changes, then brought your parents in. Mr. Peterson questioned whether they wanted to leave you with so little, but your brother was insistent. And my parents? I pressed. They seemed resigned. Your mother asked twice if they could include a trust for you, but your brother talked her out of it. Said something about enabling poor decisions. Each conversation built a clearer picture. Nathan had orchestrated the will changes, possibly exploiting our parents' concerns while actively working to prevent them from revising it again when they had second thoughts. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source, my father's administrative assistant at the financial firm. She contacted me after hearing about the legal proceedings from mutual acquaintances. Your father kept a voice recorder in his desk, she told me. He used it to dictate notes about client meetings. The week before the accident, he recorded a conversation with your brother that you should hear. The next day, I sat in Julia's office as we played the recording she'd couriered to us. My father's voice, which I hadn't heard since his death, made me grip the armrests of my chair. Nathan, your mother and I have been talking, he began, sounding tired but determined. After we visit Heather's show, we want to revise the estate plan. The current arrangement isn't fair to her. Nathan's voice was sharp in response. Dad, we've been over this. Heather made her choices. You can't reward her instability now just because she finally has a decent job. It's more than a decent job, Nathan. She's built something on her own terms. That takes courage. It takes selfishness, Nathan countered. While I've been helping manage your portfolios and taking care of this family, she's been off playing artist. Now that she's finally becoming successful, you want to reward her decade of irresponsibility? That's not fair, and you know it. My father's voice grew stronger. We let you influence us too much last time. Heather deserves better from us. What about my children? Nathan demanded. You're going to take from their inheritance to subsidize Heather's lifestyle choices? She doesn't even want kids. The family legacy ends with her. The argument continued, with Nathan becoming increasingly aggressive, eventually threatening to withdraw his own support for my parents' retirement plans if they undermined family values by changing the will. By the recording's end, my father sounded defeated, agreeing to postpone any decisions until after their Chicago trip. A trip they would never take. Julia looked at me with renewed conviction. This is exactly what we needed. Clear evidence of manipulation and threats. Armed with this evidence and testimony, Julia filed an amended petition challenging the will on grounds of undue influence and coercion. The local newspaper caught wind of the story. Wealthy financial advisor accused of manipulating parents' will to disinherit sister, and suddenly our private family matter became public knowledge. Nathan called me directly for the first time in months, his voice tight with controlled fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Heather?" "Seeking the truth," I replied, surprised by my own calmness. "Something you've been working very hard to hide. You're dragging our family's name through mud for money," he spat. "Is that what your precious artistic integrity amounts to?" "This isn't about money, Nathan. It's about what Mom and Dad really wanted versus what you manipulated them into doing. You'll regret this," he threatened before hanging up. His legal team responded with aggressive countermotions, claiming I was motivated by financial desperation after losing my job. But they couldn't explain away the recording, the journal entries, or the testimony we'd gathered. The truth about Nathan's financial situation emerged during discovery. Despite his apparent success, he had made several risky investments that had gone badly wrong. He was leveraged to the hilt, using the expectation of inheritance as collateral for loans to maintain his lavish lifestyle. The court scheduled a hearing, but 2 days before our court date, Nathan's lawyer contacted Julia requesting a settlement meeting. "He's running scared," Julia told me. "The evidence is too strong, and he knows it." We met at Julia's office, Nathan arriving with his attorney but without the usual confidence in his bearing. He barely met my eyes as we sat across from each other. "My client is prepared to offer a compromise," his lawyer began. "Equal division of all assets, with Mr. Wilson retaining the family home but providing financial compensation to Ms. Wilson for her share. Julia and I had discussed our terms in advance." "We'll accept equal division," I replied, "but I want the lake house. It was where I felt closest to Mom and Dad." Nathan's jaw tightened, but after a whispered consultation with his lawyer, he nodded curtly. "There's one more condition," I added. "A public acknowledgement that our parents intended to revise their will before their accident. I don't want their legacy to be this ugly division between us." "Absolutely not," Nathan snapped. "I won't admit to anything that suggests wrongdoing on my part." His lawyer placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Perhaps we could agree to a joint statement about honoring Richard and Elizabeth Wilson's memory through an amicable resolution?" It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was enough. "I can accept that," I said. As we signed the preliminary agreement, Nathan finally spoke directly to me. "You know this will change things between us permanently." I met his gaze steadily. "They were already changed the moment you decided I deserved nothing from our parents." He had no response to that. News of the settlement spread quickly through our parents' social circle. Several people reached out to express support, saying they'd always found the original will surprising given how proudly my parents had spoken of me in recent years. The formal division of assets took several more months to complete, but by late summer, I had received my share of the inheritance and the keys to the lake house. The family home went to Nathan as agreed, though I arranged one final visit to collect personal items and say goodbye to the place where I grew up. As painful as the legal battle had been, it had achieved something beyond financial justice. It had revealed the truth. My parents had recognized their mistake and planned to correct it. Their final thoughts of me hadn't been disappointment, but pride and love. No inheritance could have meant more than that knowledge. 1 year after that devastating day in the lawyer's office, I stood at the window of my studio in downtown Chicago, watching autumn leaves swirl across the street below. The space was twice the size of my previous studio, with north-facing windows that bathed my canvases in perfect natural light. On the far wall hung an announcement for my upcoming solo exhibition, Inheritance, my most personal collection yet. The settlement with Nathan had provided financial security I'd never known before, but more importantly, it had given me closure. The lake house had become my sanctuary on weekends, its peaceful shoreline the perfect place to heal and create. I'd kept it largely as my parents had, though I'd converted the sunroom into a painting studio where I could work surrounded by water and sky. My phone buzzed with a message from Emma, gallery called. "They're getting media requests for your opening. New York Times art section interested. You've come a long way from that hotel room, kiddo." I smiled, remembering how far I'd come indeed. After the settlement, I'd made decisions that surprised even myself. Rather than keeping all the inheritance, I'd established a scholarship fund in my parents' name at the local arts high school, specifically for students pursuing creative careers despite family pressure to follow more traditional paths. Nathan and I maintained minimal contact, exchanging brief, civil emails about remaining family matters but otherwise leading separate lives. He'd sold his luxury condo and scaled back his lifestyle after the truth about his financial difficulties became known at his firm. Last I heard, he'd moved to another state for a fresh start. I wished him well, not out of forgiveness necessarily, but because holding on to anger would only hurt me in the end. The most meaningful part of my inheritance hadn't been the money at all, but the family photo albums and my mother's art books. I'd spent countless evenings paging through them, seeing my family history with new eyes, noticing moments of genuine connection I'd missed before, understanding my parents' journey as flawed people who had ultimately begun to recognize their mistakes, even if too late. My phone rang. Julia, my attorney, now a friend. Just checking in on my favorite client, she said warmly. How's the new collection coming? Almost ready for the show. Actually, I wanted to ask if you'd come to the opening? You're a big part of why this collection exists. I wouldn't miss it, she replied. Your parents would be proud, you know. I think they would, I agreed, looking at the framed article from my father's study that now hung in my own office. At least, I'd like to think they were getting there. After we hung up, I turned back to the large canvas on my easel, the centerpiece of my upcoming show. It depicted a woman standing at a crossroads, one path leading toward a traditional house with white picket fence, the other toward an open horizon filled with vivid color and light. The figure stood firmly on the second path, but her hand reached back toward the first, not in longing but in acknowledgement of where she'd come from. I'd titled up both paths, my statement about honoring origins while choosing your own direction. My journey through grief, betrayal, and ultimately vindication had transformed not just my circumstances but my art itself. Critics who previewed the collection noted a new depth and maturity in my work, a compassionate understanding of human failings alongside an unflinching commitment to truth. That evening, I hosted a small dinner at my loft for the people who'd supported me through the darkest year of my life, Emma and her wife, Julia, my former boss who'd rehired me before I decided to pursue art full-time, and a few loyal friends who'd stood by me when everything fell apart. As we raised glasses in a toast, Emma said, to Heather, who lost everything and found herself. And to true inheritance, I added, which isn't about money or property at all, but about the resilience we build and the people who help us discover our worth. Later, after my guests had gone, I sat alone with a final glass of wine, mentally composing the artist's statement that would accompany my exhibition. The words came easily now. We inherit more than assets from our families. We inherit beliefs about our value, expectations that shape our choices, and wounds that can either define or refine us. This collection explores my journey to understand that true legacy isn't what's written in a will, but what we choose to carry forward and what we have the courage to leave behind. The painful truth I'd discovered in that lawyer's office had ultimately set me free, not just financially, but from the lifetime of seeking approval that had driven so many of my choices. My parents had begun their journey toward accepting me as I was, but hadn't completed it before their deaths. I had finished that journey for all of us. As I prepared for bed, I paused at the small altar-like arrangement on my dresser, a photograph of my parents, the paintbrushes my father had given me, and my mother's pearl earrings. I'm okay, I whispered to them. And I think you would be proud of how far I've come. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when family expectations clashed with your own path? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. What inheritance, emotional or otherwise, has shaped your life? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength through life's most challenging moments, and share this with someone who might need to be reminded of their own worth today. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. May you find the courage to claim your own path, whatever it may be.